Welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast, where we explore the connection between nutrition, performance, and health for busy, active people. I'm Claire Shorenstein, a sports dietitian and endurance athlete, and in every episode, I share evidence-based guidance, inspiring athlete stories, and practical tips on a wide variety of nutrition topics so that you can feel better, crush your endurance goals, and thrive as a human being. Today, I'm so excited to share my conversation with Zach Bitter. In case you don't already know Zach, he's a professional endurance athlete, a USATF certified coach, and host of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. Zach has broken both world and American records, competed for Team USA at the World 100K Championships, and holds 4 national championships in the 50-mile, 100-kilometer, and 100-mile distance. And what's most exciting and relevant to our chat today is that Zach has recently switched to a high-carb diet after a very long stretch of following a low-carb one. And by long, I mean 14 years. He started his carb experimentation this past summer, and so far it has been going very well. We chat about why he decided to go low-carb as a younger ultrarunner and what that looked like in practice over the years, what motivated him to dramatically increase his carb intake this past summer, why remaining curious and flexible is so important, and so much more. Before we dive in, I want to give a quick shout out to my monthly nutrition membership, Fuel for Life Crew. For just $39 a month, you get access to my entire library of masterclasses and downloads. You get monthly live calls, a private Slack community where you can ask me questions and connect with other members about all things nutrition. There's no commitment. You can try it for a month and cancel anytime or sign up for multiple months to get a discount. Here are a few short testimonials from my members. Jennifer says, what a great value and a ton of research-based current information for any level of athlete, a great investment for yourself and long-term wellness. Sarah says, I joined Fuel for Life Crew and gained access to the priceless tutorials and plans, all of which I could individualize to my own needs and goals. In addition, I could reach out directly to Claire in Slack. She is responsive, thorough, and keeps things interesting and helpful. I attribute finishing training and my first full Ironman as a busy mama of 3 to feeling well thanks to Claire and the community coaching she has thoughtfully developed. And lastly, Kara says, amazing value. I love all the classes. The handouts are great. And I love how I'm able to ask questions and how responsive Claire is to answering. You can read more testimonials over at eatforendurance.com and to also join the crew today. All right, here is my chat with ultrarunner Zach Bitter. Zach, welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. Happy Friday. How's everything going for you?
Yeah, happy Friday. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Well, Zach, I wanted to have you on the show in part because, I've heard your name kind of thrown around for many, many years. And, you were a low carb athlete for 14 years. So I always kind of associated you with the low carb stuff. I've been on panels in the past where, me as a big fan of carbs, and all my listeners know I'm a huge fan of carbs, but I'd be on a panel with someone who's low carb and your name would be thrown out along with others who are following that lifestyle or that diet. And I was so curious hearing that you've now been experimenting with carbohydrate. And so, I thought it would just be such an interesting conversation to talk about what led you to explore including more carbohydrates in the diet and what that's been like for you. I know on your own podcast, you've been really detailed with sharing this whole experiment with everybody. And I think you've been coming at it with a lot of curiosity and just like a really interesting approach and not holding back any of those details, right? So I think that's been really awesome that you've been doing that. So we're going to get all into all of this, but where I like to start these interviews is backing up quite a bit and digging into your nutrition roots. So I would love to hear first, before we get into the more recent stuff, what kind of memories you have about food, and meal times kind of growing up and just sharing a little bit about that time of your life.
Yeah. When I grew up, my mom was really good at cooking, at least from my perception. I don't know how much she'd take that or one way or the other, but I always found that we had a pretty good structure with that sort of thing. In a way where there was a plan in place. So like there was breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and things like that. And there were generally what I would consider like pretty typical options for a kid. Pretty similar school type cafeteria foods for the lunch during a school year. Breakfast would usually be, like some pretty wide range of stuff. Sometimes it'd be eggs and bacon, sometimes it'd be cereal, sometimes it'd be oatmeal. Dinners were a little bit more kind of like more traditional, like home cooked meals and things like that. But I can't say I have any complaints about my childhood food experience. At the time, I probably had plenty of complaints.
Yeah.
But when I taught, I was a teacher for a while, and you just see such a wide range of experiences that kids have with food, and just to the degree that they even get it at home.
Yeah.
So looking back at it through that lens, I'm pretty grateful that I never really thought about, like, at no point did I ever think like, oh man, I wonder if I'm going to have breakfast the next day, or I wonder if there's going to be lunch, or is there someone to be home to cook dinner? And so from that framework, or that standpoint, I was pretty fortunate.
Yeah, for sure. What did you teach?
I was dual certified. So I was Broadfield Social Studies and History, and then I had a special education license too. So I did everything from 7th grade special ed early on. Then at the high school level, I kind of did a wider range of stuff because I was at a project-based school, and they really tried to use us to our full capacity if possible.
Yeah.
So I kind of dipped into like all sorts of different subjects and topic areas for that one.
And that's before you kind of went into like being a pro athlete?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
I did that for about 5 years. And then I had an opportunity just between like kind of just the growth within coaching and some pro sponsorship type of stuff to take a shot at that. And, I kind of took it 1 year at a time, and it just has more or less evolved over the last, I guess, almost 10 years at this point, 10, 11 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you started running it like when you were quite young. You were doing kind of cross country track type of stuff. Tell me a little bit about that. And do you even remember food as something that was fueling you? Did you even think about nutrition in that way? Or how did you kind of approach nutrition back then?
Yeah, I was a really active kid. So I think my parents were of the mindset that they didn't really care what sport I did, but the expectation was that I did something. So that meant that I got to explore a lot, and I was pretty curious with it. So I didn't really gravitate to any one sport other than, you get kind of, as like seasons would come and go, you'd get interested in it, and then you'd invest and then be in that season, then you move to the next one. So it really wasn't until probably later in middle school that I even considered running any sort of a sport. And that sort of came through like track and field day and like presidential physical fitness challenge type stuff. And I think it was 6th grade was when I really started actually recognizing that there's a variance there. And before then, it was just like, oh, I'm faster than this friend of mine. And we know that because if we're on a football field and we start sprinting, he gets there quicker than I do.
Yeah.
But that was really it. And then track and field day, it was like, okay, well, there's a difference between the 100-meter dash and the 1600. So I kind of got a peek into like maybe where my strengths were. And they did lean a little bit more towards distance running. So I started getting interested in that as an actual sport around that time, but didn't really take it too seriously until high school. And even in high school, I would say, like, relative to a lot of my peers, I probably didn't take it all that seriously, but it did become like the sport that I focused on the most.
And so I guess when you say you weren't taking it very seriously, then were you not making that link with nutrition or thinking about it? Because right now you're so focused, on nutrition, the way you talk about nutrition. Obviously you're a lot older than, kids aren't always as focused on that stuff. But, high school and into college was like, at what point did you start making that connection or thinking a little bit differently about nutrition, or maybe being a little more focused on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I didn't really answer that one when you asked it originally too. I would say, like, up until college, I pretty much just went with the flow of what was there. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, luckily I had a good structure in place for that. So I just kind of ate when I was hungry or ate when I was told to eat, and kind of went that route. In college is where I started thinking about it through the lens of, all right, I'm really focusing on a sport now. And that's really where I started taking running seriously, to the degree where I was like, okay, I'm going to train year round. I'm asking a lot more from my body than I was in high school. What are all the inputs? And that kind of coincided with me just taking a lot of things in life maybe a little more seriously. Just like I think it might have just been college was such a deviation from high school from a responsibility standpoint that it kind of flipped the switch in my mind where I was like, okay, well, I'm paying for this course, so the better I do, the better value I get out of it. For some reason, that connected there. And I think that kind of fed into like other areas of my life too, where it was like, if I'm going to invest time and energy into this, what are the things I need to do to optimize for that? And nutrition kind of just came along for the ride at that point, where I just started looking at like, okay, what are runners eating? Like, what does a professional or even just someone who's serious about running distances eat? And you go into that world, and usually you're exposed to like more of the high carb stuff for the most part there. So that was the direction I first went with any sort of focus.
Yeah. And so that's what I kind of want to explore, because you started in the higher carb area, you went into low carb, and then you returned to carb. Although we don't know yet if that return is going to be forever or just for now or whatever. But I'm kind of, so, it's interesting because often when people change their diet very drastically, as you have done over time, it's because something wasn't working for them, or they really felt maybe this will work better or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. And you come at things from a standpoint of curiosity. My understanding is that you left carbs because those weren't working for you as well, and you want to explore something. But then you kind of took a break from the low carb thing, not necessarily because it was not working, but because you thought, oh, I'm really curious and this might work better. But so kind of going back to the original carb time, like, yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Because again, the sense I got is that this wasn't working enough or well enough for you as an athlete that would like keep you there. Like you really wanted to go somewhere else to try it. So I'm just kind of curious what these earlier ultra running days. I mean, I don't know at what point you got into ultra running, but in college and all that, like what was that like being on kind of a high carb diet? How did that feel in your body?
Yeah, in college, I didn't really give it any second thought. It just like seemed to work fine in terms of where I was trying to go and where I was at from a developmental standpoint. I definitely had a lot of catching up to do with respect to my peers in terms of just where I was at in the development phase of things. A lot of my teammates had been running maybe like 50, 60 miles per week in high school. So they were maybe a step ahead of me coming in. And I think my senior year was the first year I ran year round, and I was maybe hitting 20 to 30 miles per week. And then I actually didn't run track or cross country my freshman year. So I did just like a spattering of training during that phase, where the first half of that year I did very little running. The second half I started getting serious because I decided I think I was going to maybe try out for the cross country team. So I started kind of exploring what that was going to take. And but yeah, I wouldn't say I had any experience from nutrition in the college years where I was just like, okay, this is what's a limiter here. This is giving me problems. I didn't sense any of that. It really wasn't until I got to a point where I was out of college. I was working full time. I was just starting to get my training up to where was getting to a point where it's been at now since I've become an ultra marathon runner. I was averaging pretty high amounts of volume. And kind of shifting my focus from like 5Ks, 10Ks, and that sort of distance towards 50 milers were the races I was doing at that point in time as the primary input. So yeah, I kind of had a season of racing that was technically my first full season of ultra racing, where I did 350 milers in the second half of the year in a pretty tight range. And a lot of this stuff kind of happened in combination with one another to the degree where I think it just lined up to a way that I got curious enough about it. Like my schedule was like wake up at 4:30 in the morning, run for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, go to school, teach, then maybe do some training session, maybe another run, maybe strength work, maybe some combination of those, eat, and then kind of like rinse and repeat essentially. So the school year was quite busy, and one of the ways I sort of managed that was I looked for ways to do multiple things at once if I could. And the thing that was really obvious to me was like, well, if I'm going to go run for 2 hours in the morning, I can be listening to podcasts, and podcasts were kind of starting to really become a thing at that point in time. Still very much in the early days. This would have been like 2011, 2010, 11, 12, like right around there.
Okay.
And yeah, so I just started listening to a lot of like running based podcasts, endurance based podcasts and things like that. And that's where I kind of came across low carbohydrate nutrition. And you probably know more about this than I do, but there was like that wave of low carb that I think kind of started picking up around that time. So maybe that's why I happened to come across it at the way I did. I don't know, like maybe if I'd been 5 years earlier, I would have been void of the space and never even come across it. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting through the lens of ultra marathon running, since my goal was to get to 100 miles. That was going to be kind of the end game with the ultra running stuff. And listening to some of the like Jeff Volek and Steve Finney stuff, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. I would say those three probably had a fairly big influence on just my understanding of low carb nutrition relative to endurance and things like that. So in my mind, I was thinking, and there's a few things going on. One was like the race season that year. It felt like I had a decent 3 races, but it also kind of felt like this is maybe a little bit unsustainable. I mean, in hindsight, there was a lot going on. I was also quite young. So it's like all those moving parts didn't necessarily register in my mind, probably as like as stressful as it actually was. But I do remember thinking like, well, training this much during the school year and just navigating everything feels somewhat unsustainable. But at the same time, I was new to it. I really loved it. I didn't really want to back off on it. So I was resistant to maybe changing that if I didn't have to. And I can't remember who told me this, but someone told me like, don't change things during a season. It's just a bad idea. You're going to nutritionally anyway. So I didn't really give it any thought until I got to the end of that last race that fall. And then I was entering an off season. So I was like, well, maybe I'll try low carbohydrate and just see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it does, then maybe I can figure something out. And I had a pretty good experience with it for that off season. And then when I started ramping up training, I did start to see some potential pitfalls with just like a strict ketogenic approach, which is sort of all you really saw back then. There wasn't really a lot of variance between, at least that I saw, between strict ketogenic and now you have like ketogenic, low carb, some, periodized, all sorts of iterations of it.
Yeah.
And so I sort of explored that a little bit more based on my own experience, where I felt like pretty decent at low intensity stuff like that normalized within about a month, where I was running about the same pace at the same intensity. It wasn't until I started doing intervals that I realized, there's obviously some limitation here. So I started bringing carbohydrates back kind of around those sessions. And that seemed to work pretty well. I was able to kind of hit some of the splits that I was hitting prior to that when I would kind of periodize it that way. And I probably spent maybe about a year and a half really fine tuning how that looked before I really got a structure that I thought was going to work well for me. And then I just rode with it basically for the next 12 years and did all my 100 milers up until this last fall with a low carbohydrate approach.
Yeah. So what it sounds like then is what you were doing before in college and afterwards, it wasn't that carbohydrates were causing issues and you weren't like having debilitating GI issues or other problems. It was more just, oh, hey, I listened to these podcasts. This sounds interesting. Let me give it a try.
Yeah.
Is that accurate what you say?
Yeah, I didn't have any GI issues in college. I would say like there was some motivation to play around with it due to like race fueling needs, because at the time I was doing these 50 milers I was still high carb at the time. And I think I was doing like probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 to 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And I did finish those races feeling like this I'm not gonna be able to do this for 50 more miles. So part of me was thinking ahead too of just like, well, what happens if I try to apply this framework into a 100-mile race? And I mean, a lot has changed with respect to what someone would do in that situation now, and even the products that you can use now.
Yeah.
That, I always wonder about what my move would have been if I would be, I guess, 10, 15 years younger and had that same sort of trajectory into the sport just later on with like what we have nowadays with the research around like gut training and the different products.
Yeah. I was going to say, because I was like, so funny you say that, because I heard you talk extensively about how well you're tolerating, was it 80 to 90 grams of carb an hour or whatever. Right. So it's funny, but we have to consider, obviously the sports nutrition world has changed dramatically, over 10 plus years. And I mean, what hasn't changed so much is the research showing carbs being beneficial, and we're just seeing it now in even higher carb iterations. So okay, that's super interesting. I want to explore a little bit more about the low carb stuff before we move into your high carb situation right now. But I guess typically when I think about low carbohydrate, it seems, and certainly from my experience as a dietitian or just observing people, it seems like such a hard diet to sustain, to follow, to kind of like live your actual life. Obviously, being more of an elite athlete where you're dedicated on a different level is different from being a recreational athlete, but still, you are still a human being living your life. And I know
Yeah.
you want to enjoy certain parts of your life. So, but I believe I've heard you talk about low carb as being something that it didn't seem like it was something that was so difficult for you to sustain, or maybe you just got into so much of a rhythm, you just became used to it. But I'm just curious, why do you think you were able to follow this diet for as long as you did? Because I've heard you talk about, like, you gave some sample days of, in different phases of training, off season, base, building, kind of more speed stuff, your long stuff. Like, we're still talking 120, 130 grams of carb a day. Like, it's really low. And sometimes it's lower than that. So I'd say for a lot of people, that's really difficult. And so I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I would say, like, the lifestyle probably helped a little bit because I didn't have to be quite as strict as what someone who is like very low activity would be if they were trying to like shift the metabolism to the same degree I was able to do, just because the amount of training I was doing was going to push fat ox to a certain level even with a high carbohydrate input. So that probably made it a little easier, where it wasn't like I was like avoiding all carbohydrates, because really when you look at a strict ketogenic diet, you got to even be looking at non-starchy vegetables, because really that's all you can get. That's all you can get away with. It's non-starchy vegetables and then, oils, fats, and meats essentially. So there's just not a lot of wiggle room there. Whereas for me, I would say on an average, I was probably around 150 grams of carbohydrate. And then if I was having a training day that was either high enough volume or enough intensity embedded into it, I would be getting up to 200, maybe even 300 grams on some of those days. So,
okay. Got it.
So
okay.
It would, if you looked at an average, maybe month, I'd probably be sitting around 150 grams or so, but that could come in a lot of different shapes if there was a lot of variety in the training. So there might be a day where I was following more of a strict ketogenic input and being as low as 50 grams, but then that might be matched with a day that was like 250 grams. And then it would kind of average out to that. So I think sometimes just the variability in that gave me, like, I was never really looking that far down the road in terms of like, all right, I'm gonna do a strict ketogenic diet for the rest of my life. That means carbs are basically off the table, and definitely there's like no light at the end of the tunnel if that was a food source I wanted to have. But I mean, I do think there's also like personality traits with this sort of thing too, where some people are going to gravitate towards other things and have preferences. And for me, I find when it comes to food, I don't have a problem with just like pretty consistent, similar things and putting it on repeat for a while, as long as it's not like forever. So a lot of the things I did within low carb those 14 years is I just would change the inputs, and that would maybe be the variety that I'd be seeking. And that was enough for me to make it sustainable. So like I did everything from like mostly plant-based low carb to like mostly animal-based low carb to like some mixture of the two over the course of those 14 years. And I think some of it was like when I started kind of getting a little tired or a little sick of the current inputs, I would just switch them out. So to some degree, I was like probably spoiled by just how much variety and access we have to tons of different food, even when you're in a more restricted side of things. If there was less options, then maybe that would have been more difficult for me. But, I managed to find it relatively sustainable. But that is a pinch point. I've worked with a lot of people from the coaching side of things that have tried low carb, and it does vary quite a bit. Some people gravitated to it and really like it. And other people, it was just like, it's not worth even continuing this because you're not going to sustain it, even if you believe in it or think it's going to work better. It's like, you're not going to do it. So
yeah.
So I mean, did a lot of that.
I do think it's a certain type of personality. It seems, I could be wrong here, but I feel like men tend to do a little bit better in this, or seem to be able to do this more than women sometimes, and be able to kind of get away with it from a performance standpoint. I mean, ultimately, all of this is N of one, right? And you make that, I think, pretty clear too, that you're constantly kind of experimenting with stuff. And, this is all because a lot of people don't do well on this style of eating, but it's interesting to hear you talk about kind of the variability of the carbohydrate, which still was well below the recommendations. Like if you look at any sports nutrition guidelines recommendations based on research, it's much higher than what you were taking in, but clearly you were performing really well on it, right? You got your world record, you got all these great results with it. But yeah, I guess like, because again, when you were kind of going through what you're eating, it's like, some berries and little honey or, like various
Yeah.
things. And for many people, though, they want to enjoy a cookie or some other dessert or like other things that aren't within like a really kind of very strict set of foods that are
Hmm.
what we would, classically consider, quote, healthy foods. Right. So, I mean, do you ever kind of have those foods? Did you miss those foods? Is that something you didn't really care about? Because there are people who really don't care about food in that way. I'm kind of curious where you sat.
Yeah, I probably trend towards the less interested in it. Like
Hmm.
it's not something I don't. It wouldn't be like it's not a scenario where I was like, oh, I don't feel any way about it, but it maybe
Mm,
wasn't a big enough drive where it was compelling. Similar to like when I talk about this training too, like there's a certain amount of running I just love and I'll probably always do it. And then there's this layer of training that I do because I want to optimize for a race. And sometimes that's not fun and I do it anyway. So I kind of viewed it through the same lens where it was like, I enjoy this enough that that it's worth it if it's trying to meet if there's an end to it that I'm trying to get from it. So
hmm.
uh but yeah, I think I probably am less interested in food. And then, the other thing too is like from a craving standpoint, I tend to crave more salty, savory foods in general than I do sweet foods. So
Mm, okay.
that may be something just that was in my best interest with respect to making it sustainable is like you get into the low carb world and it's just going to be a lot more savory, salty type
Yeah.
stuff versus the sweet stuff. So perhaps that had something to do with it too, where just
Hmm.
at the individual level, I didn't have that as big of a draw as maybe the average person would.
Yeah. And did you feel like you were able to still kind of live your life, be social, and do all of that for you? Like that, I mean, clearly you must have because you did it for so long. It
Yeah.
seemed pretty easy to do that.
Yeah, it wasn't too hard and really like if it was something where it's like with any diet, because I think this is easy, and I think I could probably give this impression because I do talk about structure and detail and stuff a lot. So, but it is something where it's like none of these things are done 100% compliant.
Yeah.
They're not, and like at least I didn't do it 100% compliant. So like if I was out with friends and we were in a situation where it's like I just could not make it work, I wasn't gonna be the person who says, "Oh, you don't have fun with that. I'm just going to sit here and twiddle my thumbs while you guys eat that." It would be like at most I would eat it and I would account for it and be like, okay, well, I had more carbs today than I normally would, and I'll adjust for it in the following days when I have a little bit more control over what I'm eating. So I think I had enough carbohydrates in my diet where it wasn't something where I couldn't manipulate stuff to be able to manage the social aspect of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, as you said, it takes a certain personality. I'd say most people who are listening don't have the time, the energy, the drive to kind of be so meticulous about a way of eating that they could
Yeah.
necessarily be compliant enough to make it worthwhile, right?
Mhm.
Not to mention, I mean, I personally don't recommend low carb diets for my athletes, but obviously there are people out there that make it work for them, and I always try to keep an open mind. And at the end of the day, people can try whatever they want; it's their body. Um,
Yeah. Well, I
yeah.
think
So.
anytime you do a very strict dietary approach where
Mhm.
it's got like limitations that go above and beyond like pretty much being open to most things, you're going to have like a super high failure rate. Like I
Yeah.
think like maybe you know more about this. It's like if you look at like when they study compliance to any very strict approach, it's usually like single digit percentage compliance over time. So, I mean, that would make sense. Like low carb, certainly ketogenic is strict and restrictive enough where if you try to apply that to everybody, given enough time, we're probably going to see like 5, 6, 7% people stick with it versus
Yeah.
all of them. And
But that's like
that's just a
any
really big
diet.
failure rate.
It's any diet.
Yeah.
It's any diet
Mhm.
where there are lots
Yeah.
of rules and restrictions and
Right. Right.
because you're either on the diet or you're off the diet. And
Mhm.
so that's why instead I know with my clients at least we're kind of starting with kind of small changes that are actually achievable and kind of building on
Mhm.
them based on what they need. But
Yeah.
I have one more
That-
question about sorry, go ahead. You're gonna say
I was
something.
going to say that was one thing that I did try to like maintain through it too
Hmm.
was because there's a lot of fear mongering around food in general where food is seen as good or bad.
Yes.
And that never really made sense to me once I really got into the low carb stuff for a few years where it was like these are kind of tools at the end of the day. So looking at them as good or bad seems counterproductive, and also just putting yourself in a bad headspace and having a bad relationship with any of this stuff. So like when I would look at like different carbohydrate sources or different food groups and things like that, it was more about like, okay, well that's a tool. Maybe I'd use it here, but maybe I wouldn't here within the context of what I'm doing with training right now. But I think maintaining for people that are going in, if someone's considering low carbohydrate, I usually try to tell them like, don't look at these inputs as like, these are bad things. It's just, these are things that maybe you're going to use in different variances than somebody else. So, at the end of the day, I think some of it is like trying to maintain a good relationship with the food, even if you are going to put controls in place for one reason or the other.
Yeah, and I agree with that because too often we see people following, more restrictive or extreme diets very much demonize food groups, like all carbs are bad, or all you can't have great, like that kind of stuff, and it's where it's just not true. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. I have one last question about the low carb era, as we can call it, before we move on. And it's about race fueling. So I'm really curious kind of what kinds of, or maybe it's also training as well, like what kinds of products we're using, or were they kind of standard products? It sounds like you were getting some carbs in. Were you using other nutrients to fuel yourself? Like what did that all look like for you?
Yeah. I would say like my fueling during a race didn't look all that different than what you would see with the other people running these ultra marathons, endurance races. I was just doing less of it. So like if I did, like one of the things I did when I ran my fastest 100-miler, I actually went in and got a metabolic cart test to find out what are my fat ox and carb ox rates at the pace and intensity at which I'm trying to do this race at. And I got that data, and it came out to be somewhere in the neighborhood of around 40 grams per hour was the top end of what I would need at that intensity. So I was just taking in, I think for that particular race, it was all just liquid carbohydrates, just like sports product. I think I was using, at that time, I was using like X Endurance Fuel 5. It was almost just that. I think I maybe had like a little bit of Mountain Dew or something like during the day. But I'm pretty sure that one was, I'd have to look at my notes to get the exact details. But I'm pretty sure it was like almost all Fuel 5 and then a little bit of Mountain Dew near the end.
Okay. So 40 grams per hour is roughly what you're aiming for. What about kind of like going into a race? I mean, traditionally we carb load. I assume that's not something you were doing. Would you at least increase your carbohydrate? Were you having a carb-rich breakfast or pre-race meal? Like what kinds of things were you doing back then?
Yeah. I would increase my carbohydrates relative to what I would normally have with the training puts that I would have during a taper. So like that last week, my training volume was down by around 50%, and intensity was almost void because I'm running a 100-mile race. So it's like, maybe some strides, but I wasn't going to try to get in like an abbreviated, like short interval session or anything like that. So I was still probably eating closer to my carb intake that I would normally have on a heavier training day for that week. And because of the reduction of training, perhaps I was having some sort of extra carb on board type of setup working for me in that regard. I would be a little more focused about that probably like the 2 to 3 days before the race versus a week out. The maybe 1 week out, I was having a few days in there where I was a little closer to maybe a strict ketogenic diet. But yeah, I wasn't doing like any huge revamp where I was eating tons of carbohydrates a couple days before. It was high relative to what I would do on that sort of a training day in most cases, but still very much low compared to what most people would be doing.
Yeah. And then are you eating before? Because even when I was hearing about your carb experimentation more recently, I didn't hear any meals pre-run, pre-race. I heard like Element or like a bunch of supplements and, including electrolytes and things like that. Do you eat before you run typically?
Yeah. For a race, I do. And then usually before a long run to some degree. So it would be like, I think before the last races I did the first one I did, I think it was like 3 slices of sourdough bread. What else did I have? I think I had some like honey, some scrambled eggs, and I think I'd have to go back and look, but I think I had like some other some like faster acting carbohydrate source too before I took the first step.
But that was more recently. That wouldn't be what you had done. Like, what would you have done back in the low carb times?
Yeah, back then it would have been something like I would have probably had like if it was more recently, like an S Fields like Life Bar or something like that, which is gonna be protein and fat based, maybe some like cream and coffee. So low volume, fat based, protein based type breakfast. Sometimes I would have scrambled eggs or something like that too. I didn't eat a ton before races. When I was low carb, is probably in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 calories of mostly fats and proteins.
I just find this like really fascinating. Again, that you're able to continue. I mean, you had these amazing performances off of so few carbohydrates, and it's like you have to also at the end of the day question like again, this is like an NOED thing, but how much of it is like natural talent? Like, because you clearly can do multiple different diets and do really well, right? Like you had a great race. This was not the last one, but the one before that went really well. Yeah. So I mean, part of the reason I wanted to explore this with you is because, we have what the research says. I always try to be open-minded with things, but we have what the current research supports, which is that carbs are essential for athletes and especially endurance athletes. And there hasn't really been meaningful research to support low carb. And yet we see people, there are people who do really well on it, right? So there will always be those people out there. And yeah, it's just like in hearing the details of what you ate, I'm always like, oh my gosh, how did you how did you do that? But so it's always really interesting to me to kind of hear about these things. Hey friends, do you ever get back from a long or hard training session and feel like you need to nap or spend the rest of the day on the couch? Are you not performing the way you'd like, or maybe you're a bit overwhelmed by all the nutrition noise coming at you from all corners of the internet? Whatever struggles you're having, I'd love to help. In case you haven't checked it out yet, my website, eatforendurance.com, has tons of freebies, including downloads and blog posts. And I also have low-cost resources to support you with whatever you are working on or struggling with. I have a monthly membership where you get to ask me your nutrition questions in our private community, attend live monthly calls, connect with other athletes, and access my entire nutrition library for only $39 a month. And if you'd like to dive deeper and get truly individualized nutrition support, check out my 3 and 6 month one-to-one coaching programs. I only accept a limited number of clients to ensure every person receives the individualized attention and depth of support required to create meaningful, lasting change. I have tons of testimonials on my website if you're curious what my past clients have to say about our work together, and I also offer free discovery calls to make sure we're the right fit. Visit eatforendurance.com to grab your free downloads, explore my low-cost resources, sign up for my membership, or learn more about one-to-one nutrition coaching. All right, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, so I guess I want to move into, I know you ended up moving to Austin from Phoenix, and so there's like all these different things happening. Years have passed from, your world record and everything, and then you suddenly switch into this new way of eating. And I know you mentioned, Dave Roche and just seeing kind of these performances on high carb, but like, yeah, I wanted you to talk me through kind of this decision to switch because you'd been doing this for so long. Did you feel like you needed to switch things up or things weren't feeling good, or like what was it, just curiosity because people are doing so well on it? Like what ultimately led you to change?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think this is just like a good way to follow up on what you said too before is like, I think there's uniqueness to races as long as the ones I'm doing versus like Olympic distance stuff. So for me to do run a 100-mile world record with a low carb approach is way different than say the world record at the marathon got broken.
Sure.
We're just not going to see that.
Yeah.
Like, the way I would usually describe that would be like if you took, because people would say like, well, here's this person who ran a fast marathon. I was like, well, this is the way to think about it. If you would have taken Kipchoge or Kiptum in their primes and put them on a low carb or ketogenic diet, they still would have been really fast. They would have run like a 2:10, a 2:15 marathon. So they would have been really, really fast. They just wouldn't have been as fast as they were with the carbohydrates. So there's going to be a performance compromise when we're in races that are demanding that much oxygen, or we're demanding that kind of middle to higher end of the aerobic intensity spectrum. There's a chance that that gets normalized when you're racing below your aerobic threshold, but we're still just speculating at that point. So I think there's probably a larger window or maybe a smaller compromise when you're doing low carb for something like 100 miles. And, it was something where like clearly I explored it pretty thoroughly and, got myself to a point where I was putting up really good races with it. But it was also something where I ran that fastest race was a few years ago at this point. So it was something where with time, I look at it as like, well, maybe I reached whatever my limit would be in terms of my fastest time with that approach. And as this new wave of kind of higher carb approaches come in, and also just looking at it differently too, because back then I just looked at it as an oxidation question. That was all it was. It was, what are my oxidation rates? What are the demands for that? Meet those demands. And that's what's going to keep me moving on race day. So if I was able to do the training to get myself in position to race at the intensity I wanted it to, if I matched the oxidation rates, that's what it would require. And when I was low carb, those oxidation rates were really low from a carbohydrate standpoint at 40 grams per hour. So that all made sense. When David and some of this other stuff started coming through, it was kind of more about like, well, maybe it's more than just an oxidation question. Maybe it's like, maybe that's a big part of it, but then maybe there's other benefits of going above and beyond that. And that got me kind of curious, because I just thought like, well, if I've explored the low carb stuff to the degree where it's a good chance I don't run another faster time with that, I need to change something if I want any chance of PRing again. So that was just one of the things that I considered. And I guess I'm still in that process technically of like thoroughly exploring that. But that was the thought process from the shift is, okay, let's give this a shot. I've never run 100 miles on high carb, so I can't say even at a personal level whether I would do better or worse with it, because I hadn't tried it. You know, it was like back then it was just I speculated that it was going to be difficult to hit the oxidation demand that I would want. And that would be a big enough pinch point to, you know, even those things out. But if there was a way to do it and now all of a sudden I could, maybe I open up an extra 1, 2, 3% or something like that, that gives me a potential with a similar day that I had in 2019 to run faster. So that was probably the big driver with it.
Yeah. See, what I appreciate about you is that you remain curious and not like locked into this like dogmatic, like this is the only way to eat, because there are a lot of people out there who, especially in some of these different, you know, more restrictive diets where they're just so like,
Making, you know, identity.
Yeah, it really is. And you know, whether it's just like it does become your identity. And, you know, and it's almost like if you return to carbs, it's a failure or something like that. You know, it's like I almost get this sense about it. And so what I really appreciate about you is that, you know, yeah, you're just open to whatever works best for you and exploring. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. You know, this is an experiment. Maybe you'll stick with it. And so I do really appreciate that kind of perspective and approach. And what I'm actually curious about kind of along these lines, I mean, you're a coach, you have your own podcast, you've been really entrenched in the low carb world for so long. What has the response been like in your own audience and your athletes? I mean, has it been positive and supportive and curious? Has there been any like skepticism or backlash or any other negative feedback? Has there been no response? Like, I'm just curious what that's been like and what you've kind of gotten back from what you put out there.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I kind of had my foot in a couple different communities that didn't necessarily always interact with one another. There's kind of like the low carb groups of people that sometimes included endurance runners, but the endurance world as a whole is just dominant, moderate to high carbohydrate. Like even when low carb was at its like peak, its apex of like popularity, it was still a very tiny percentage of even ultra marathon runners, much less. So I think like the endurance world, the running world looked at it as like, oh, this is really cool because this is the guy that we always were told when we said, hey, you got to have carbohydrates before your race. We'd say, well, what about him? You know?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. So,
we got him back. No.
yeah, right. I mean, that's how people think, to be honest.
Yeah. Like, no, seriously.
It is the mindset, and they want to claim you one way or the other. So, So I would say I got a lot of kind of like intrigue and positive curiosity around like people just wanted to see like what my thoughts were about it, if it was something that was going to be positive, negative, or neutral. And you know, the low carb community outside of the running, you know, I probably like, I pushed back enough on just the dogma within that community over the last few years that I was doing low carb that I think it was probably something that maybe didn't come as big of a surprise because, you know, it was like I didn't show that I was going to just accept this as like this universal principle that everyone should baseline at low carb. And if you don't, you're going to compromise life quality and all that stuff that you sometimes see in the more dogmatic side of that, of any community, but that community for sure too. So, yeah. So, I mean, you definitely have some people that'll say like, oh, you're going to get diabetes.
Yeah.
You're going to regret this down the road and all that stuff. But
so ridiculous. Jesus.
But
oh my God, you're eating more berries. Like you're going to die. No,
yeah.
You're eating sourdough bread.
I didn't get a tremendous amount of pushback, at least not to my face, when I was low carb either. So it was like, I got pushback, but like, not the type that was like problematic, I would say, where someone is just like, trying to pick a fight or start drama and things like that. So it was like a pretty small aspect to that. And maybe that was because I didn't go out and say like, hey, I just broke this world record on low carb. Why isn't everyone else doing it? Kind of a mentality. Had I done that, I'm sure I would have gotten a tremendous more amount of pushback on it.
Yeah.
But so I really historically didn't get too much of that just like thrown my way that I was aware of anyway. So it was kind of similar on the other end of it too, where when I kind of decided to try this experience, I didn't get like a ton of people reaching out to me that were in the low carb community, kind of saying like too much negativity or. I got a lot of questions. A lot of people were interested and they wanted to kind of hear why. They wanted to know the experience. And I definitely got a lot of interest in those podcasts where I would talk about kind of how my experience went and what I was playing around with and shifting and those sort of things.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for explaining all that. Yeah, and now I want to get into kind of what you've been doing. So I know you've been really clear about what you're doing kind of in training and racing. You're going more towards 80 to 90 grams an hour. It seems to be mostly from gels and drinks. So, I mean, you're definitely you're not the type of racer that's having real food. You're not slamming sandwiches or something. You're doing pretty fast track stuff, like flatter, just going for speed kind of racing, which, I always say ultra running is there are so many sports within ultra running, right? There's so many different types of things going on. So we're really sports product focused. But in terms of what you're eating during the day, in terms of how much, I'm curious, how do you define moderate to high carb when you say that? Because again, there's such a rate, even when you say lower carb, it's well, what do you mean by that? There's no clear definition of that piece of things. So I know you track things, you're really a data-driven person. And so I'm really curious, what is a typical day of carb eating in terms of gram amounts, if you happen to know, just to compare it to what you were doing before?
Yeah. So during this last training cycle, I ranged between about 500 to 1,000 grams of carbohydrate per day.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah. So I was pretty high. Even on the low end of that, I'm getting up into, quite a bit more than I was before, doubling what a big day of carbohydrate would have been in the past on the low end. And then, I'd have some days where I would do a long run and I would be trying to practice race fueling and pushing 90 plus grams of carbohydrate per hour for that. And those days it was pretty easy to get up to 1,000 grams. So that was generally, kind of similar to the low carb. One of the processes was just kind of figuring out what those inputs were going to be too. So when I started, it's you gravitate towards whole foods and real foods and stuff like that. And then you realize, I think when you're running as much as I am, you can't really rely on too much whole foods because there's so much extra
fiber
that comes along with it.
Yeah,
right. It's funny because with low carb, it was you had to be careful about how much protein you would eat because protein kind of came along with so much of the fat sources that when you're eating as much as I did with that, I'd have to look at my diet and be make sure I'm not crowding out fuel sources that are actually going to be quicker acting than your body having to break down protein and use that as a fuel source. So that was kind of the trick there. Whereas with high carbohydrate, it seems to me, it's you got to be mindful of how much fiber you're eating when you're, running these 4,000 or 5,000 calorie days. So after the first few weeks, I recognized okay, I got to be careful about some of those options, starchy vegetables and fruits and things that are going to carry a little bit more of that, and make sure that I'm still having those things, but having them in a quantity that is digestible, and then focusing on, getting some of those carbohydrates intra workout, or things that are a little more refined like breads, white rices, and honeys and syrups and things like that. Or just water-based fruits too, like watermelon was a pretty easy one. Grapes tended to be a pretty easy one for me. Raisins were another thing that you could pretty easily do that didn't take up too much space in the stomach. But yeah, it's kind of like navigating. And the funny thing too is because when I was low carb, I'd gravitate to larger meals because it just felt like I could take in a tremendous amount of calories in one sitting and not feel too full. But then with high carb, I started to notice I was filling up like really quick, where I would get like halfway through my meal and I'd be like, yeah, I just don't feel like eating anymore. So then I just started like naturally gravitating toward eating like 5 or 6 times a day versus 2 or 3 main meals a day, because it's like I'd eat like 500-600 calories and then feel full, and then 2 hours later be ready to eat again. But that just seemed to feel a little more intuitive and a little bit easier digestively. So just kind of playing around with that sort of stuff was kind of that first maybe 12 weeks or so.
I find this so interesting because like fat and protein, I mean, they're so filling, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, and you're getting, I mean, I guess it depends on the what exactly you're eating. And then same with carbohydrate focus. Cause like, yeah, as you said, like how much of these fiber rich foods are you going for versus more refined products? Are you ever reaching for kind of packaged things or kind of, some of these other, like, cause so far I've really only heard you say like more whole food based things. Are you eating kind of more convenience items or anything like that?
Yeah, I'll do like cereals and things like that too. Or probably the biggest one that would be like more of a packaged stuff. I'll do some like granola bar type things too. Not a ton of it. Yeah, I did a lot of sourdough bread and homemade bread too. During that last fall. So, I mean, there was a couple days where I think I ate like 2 loaves of bread. So I was getting a ton of carbohydrates from that. But yeah, the more refined stuff or the lower fiber stuff tended to be like more like oatmeal, cereals, white rice, bread. Those are, and then like honey and things like that you could get a lot of calories in. And the other part of it too was I was taking in a lot more sports products at that point in time too, because I also was like terrified about the whole like gut issue. Because my thought was like, what if this goes like amazing and then all of a sudden I have this massive GI issue on race day?
So yeah, that's always the risk with anything.
Right. So I did a pretty thorough job of just trying to make sure I was taking in a lot more calories during workouts and things like that, or longer runs and stuff. So that was I was getting a few more calories in from more refined package type stuff during those areas.
What was like the transition like returning like low carb to higher carb, like when you were having more breads? I mean, again, it's not like you were not having any of these things. You said you did have 200, 300 gram days. So it's like you were eating these food, but were you just like, oh, carbs, I missed you? Or anything? I mean, that's how I would feel. I would be so happy. Then again, I couldn't survive without carbs for 12 years.
Yeah.
Or with few carbs. But yeah, I'm curious what that was like for you.
I would say there was a few weeks where it was kind of fun because it was just like, okay, there's like more of these things that I hadn't had as much of before. Mm-hmm. But like, I wouldn't say that like continued. It kind of like leveled off and then it kind of became normal. So then I didn't really feel that same like, I guess, excitement around it.
Yeah.
I kind of transitioned back to kind of like what I would do with low carb, where I was just like, okay, this is like a means to an end more or less. And if I want to try to make the high carb thing work right, I got to get in a lot of carbohydrates, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And so I guess how it all went so far is that the first race went, like you said, you had 0 complaints, feeling went great. And it seemed like there was a net positive effect on performance. Is that right? Was that, and then the rest of your kind of season, even though your other race didn't go as planned, it wasn't because of the nutrition. So it seems like so far your experiment is going well enough that you're still on it and exploring it. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say, but the training cycle I had for this fall or this last 6 months was notably better than anything I've done in Austin. So we've been in Austin for 4 years. So I've had a few training cycles that I could say were pretty much on par with this one in terms of how I felt from just executing these workouts at a higher level than I normally do. Mm-hmm. But it was right up there with the best ones. And then race day, and I didn't run my fastest time, but I also wasn't in as fast of an environment as I was when I ran my fastest one, but it was like on par with some of my best performances. So, it was enough positive for me to think like, okay, I need to continue to like work on this and see where I can lead. And ultimately, I'd like to get back into the Pettit Center where I ran my fastest time with a high carb approach and really see what I can do in there, because that's where you can really control a lot of stuff. But yeah, the biggest surprise to me was the actual inter-race fueling, because there was always that kind of lingering question where it's like things are going well in training, things are going well day to day, things are feeling well. I'm doing the gut training, feeling good on a long runs, but it was still something where my longest long run going into that race, I think, was 3.5 hours for just over 30 miles. And I hit like about 100 grams of carbs per hour for that one. And it went well, but it's like, okay, 3 hours is one thing, 12 is another. So
Yeah.
I went into that race like in this kind of weird headspace because I felt really good. Like I felt like my fitness is where it needs to be. And then it was just, the only question mark was like, is every hour going to feel the same? And I went in there thinking there'd maybe be a scenario where I had to pivot to some degree or make some sort of alteration, or at least kind of pull back for a while because I had like some upper GI pressure. But it honestly could not have possibly gone better. I literally just like ran plan A the entire day, to the degree where I wasn't even deviating from hour to hour. I hit just under 96. It was like 95.67 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And that range was between 90 and 100 every hour. Like there wasn't any like wide range where it was like 50 1 hour, 150 another. So that was really encouraging, in that like the thing that I thought was going to maybe be the biggest potential risk factor ended up being something that I could basically just look at as cruise control going forward. So I guess that's what I'm kind of more excited about going into this year. Is I did spend a lot of mental energy and just planning around trying to get that system in place and fine tune it. Whereas I feel like now I've got enough reps with it where I can kind of just put that on cruise control. It's intuitive enough, and spend that mental energy on something else. So then on race day, I'm going in like without necessarily any of that fear of a GI issue being kind of the limiter.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And that sounds very promising. And it sounds like you're kind of gearing up for a PR this year. Have you like set a date, or do you have a race in mind? You want to go to the Pettit Center, you said?
Yeah, that race is the second half of June. So It makes a ton of sense right now, because I do need a little bit of a break, kind of just to ramp back up and then get into a spot where I can peak. And unfortunately, I think I just drew out my long run development phase a little bit too long to accommodate both the Equalizer 12 hour that I did in October and Desert Solstice. And I was slapped in the face with that in end of December. So it was kind of a little bit of a clear indication, okay, it's time for off season. So
carbs can't save you there.
Right. Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, it is one of those things. There's so many moving parts that you have to weigh it all. But yeah, so I think I've got a good timeline. I'm not in a rush. I can afford to be patient. So that's the race I have on the calendar right now as the A race for 2026 in the first half of the year. And I'll do some shorter ultras in the meantime between then and now, just to get some longer, more structured runs in that kind of give me some race practice, but not at the 100-mile distance. And so that's the plan.
Do you ever I know you mostly try to do fast stuff. Have you ever kind of wanted to do more mountain ultras or kind of get into other environments? Is that something that interests you at any point?
Yeah, I love the trails. When we lived in Phoenix, I had better access to training for them. So, I mean, Western States was my first 100-miler. I've done that one twice. I did the San Diego 100. I've done a lot of kind of what people probably consider like entrance to like real mountain courses. Mm-hmm. I don't have as much of an interest in like the hard rock UTMB style courses. I really like the running aspect of it, and that's what I've always kind of gravitated to. So, trails are fun, and they've been a really great means to an ends for me in terms of like giving myself a break from some of this stuff, because people always ask, well, what's the difference between like doing a race on a 400-meter track versus anywhere else you'd run an ultra marathon? And it really is one of those things where it's just mentally fatiguing in a different way. not that it isn't mentally fatiguing to do the trail stuff. I'm sure it is, especially if you're kind of rinsing, repeating a similar event over and over again. But I find that you can get to a point where you can be really fit, but you just need a break from the type of focus required to really stay on point for 100 miles on an environment like that. So doing trail races and things like that have always been sort of something I've liked to have as a way to step away from this and give myself that mental break and explore a different area of the sport and things like that. And I also coach too, so having some experience on a variety of different stuff is helpful too in a sport where we are still working with a lot of unknowns, and being able to relate can be a powerful piece to the puzzle when you're helping someone else.
Yeah. Your PR for 100 miler, was that 2019 or what year was it?
Yeah.
No, 20. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's been a while. It's been more than a few years. And I'm curious, like, I mean, you're by no means old. You're still young, but I'm curious kind of how you think about age and fitness, and because as part, as you said, like there are a lot of moving parts in this whole carb experiment, and you aren't the same age you were when you got your last PR. Not that you obviously can't PR, but I'm just curious how you think about that, if it's something you even think about at all.
Yeah, no, I definitely think about it. The way I look at it is, if we look at just the 100-mile distance, especially on these more runnable ones, like the world record right now is Alexander Sorokin, and he was either 40 or 41 when he ran. I turned 40 in January, or I guess it is January. I turned 40 very soon. But then recently this year, Katriana Jennings broke the women's 100-mile world record, and she's 45. So I do think it's like there's probably a little more of a larger window when it comes to maintaining peak performance for these longer races. But I also think there's probably not a tremendous amount of time left on the table for me to be able to actualize the best race I've had. Or, if I really nail a race, it may come at a slower pace at a certain point because I'm not young enough to do it anymore. But yeah, some of it has just been like, I had a few injury issues between 2019 and this year that kind of derailed what I think I might have been able to do in that time frame had I had a little bit better luck with that, or better foresight with those occurring and being able to avoid them and things like that. So part of me thinks like if I can just get a few training cycles under my belt that have been consistent, injury free, that I can still be in a spot to take a good swing at it, and have it be something where there's still a PR potential out there. So we're going to give it a try.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Totally. One more question before I kind of go into what I call my quick bites questions. I'm curious kind of what are some main lessons you feel like you've learned from all of your experimentation over, the many years that you've been doing this, whether it's from your low carb time, from the more recent carb stuff. What are some big takeaways for you personally that maybe my audience might find valuable?
Yeah, I think the biggest one I think is like, it's good to start with where the evidence points. Because if we just look at it from a percentage standpoint, like chances are that's what's going to likely yield the best result on average. But there is still a wide range at the individual level. So like if you've been doing things the right way and it's just not working for you, especially in a sport like ultramarathon running where we're still learning quite a bit, it's like, don't be afraid to explore a little bit there. If you're not getting if something's not working, pivot, give it a try.
There you go.
and avoid the thought process, if you change, you can't go back either too. Because I think one of the things I remember when I switched to low carb, I think one of the reasons why I did it without hesitation was because the first thing I thought was like, well, if this doesn't work, then I just go back to doing what I was doing.
Yeah. No,
I didn't really think much past that. So yeah, just knowing that like you can just do things, you can just change things. So I think that helps kind of just keep that open mind and allows you to kind of explore what's available out there with a little bit less fear of pivoting if you need to.
Cool. Thanks for that. All right. Some quick questions before we wrap it up. What is your favorite post-race meal or snack?
Good question. Even with high carb after a race, I still crave salty, savory stuff. And I think it's probably just because I'm eating, even low carb, I'm eating like sweet, liquidy stuff during the race for the most part. So I've always kind of gravitated to like, something like a steak or something after a race has usually hit the spot, or at least something like dry, crunchy, salty.
Hmm.
So, I'm trying to
Opposite to
think of
what
what.
you're consuming essentially during
I
a
know, right?
race.
Yeah, go figure, right? You
Yeah.
bomb your body with this one thing for a
Yeah.
few hours. That's the last thing you want for the next bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm usually craving something more salty, savory after. So, yeah, steak is usually a one that I'll have after a race if I can get to it.
Are you including carbs in your post-race meal too, typically, or at least recently?
Yeah, yeah. As soon as my stomach comes back around, this last one, um, I felt rock solid during the race, but afterwards, my appetite for carbohydrate was just really low. So I was really thirsty though. So I think I was drinking quite a bit of fluids and trying to get that normalized first. That was one of my notes I took afterwards. I felt like I maybe ran a little bit more dehydrated after that race than I normally would for a 100 miler. So it took me a little longer. Like when I get dehydrated, especially if it's severely dehydrated, it just takes me a while to get my appetite back. So I'm like nibbling on things more than eating full meals.
Hmm.
And it took me maybe a little bit longer to get to that point where like my appetite was like, give me the whole fridge.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
You eventually get to that point either way, but
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes it takes a little longer.
Yeah.
So I think the next morning after the race, I ate quite a bit of carbohydrate. I think I had like biscuits or something like that, some sort of biscuits and gravy. I think if I remember
Oh,
right.
okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mhm.
What has been your worst race nutrition experience?
Oh, that's a good question.
Any trauma stories?
Yeah, I have some. Okay, yeah, I know what it is. I did a race. This was 2014. I was coming off my first track 100 miler where I ran the American record for 100 miles and world record for 12 hours. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm breaking the world record for 100 miles next year. So I lined up at this event. It was actually up in Alaska, but it was on an indoor track. And it's actually the same event that I broke the world record at in 2019. It just moved to Milwaukee from that old facility.
Hmm.
And I was up there and I'm pretty sure I had some sort of food poisoning
Oh
or
no.
ate something bad the day before because it was like I couldn't eat anything right away, basically, to the degree where like I was like trying to problem solve right out the gate. I was like trying everything I had available just to see if anything sat well. And the only thing that was really sitting well was Mountain Dew. So,
That's like your
you know,
staple, it sounds like.
I always have some. I always have it.
Yeah.
It's just some capacity.
Yeah.
And so my answer to the solution was just like more and more Mountain Dew. And it's like looking back at that now, it's like, oh yeah, I can see how that would be a problem over time.
Yeah,
But
that's like a lot of caffeine. Isn't it?
yeah, a lot of caffeine and just a lot of, I guess like, yeah, you get into like just ratios of carbohydrate types at that point too.
Mhm.
But yeah, I ended up having like terrible GI issues. I think I stopped 17 times just running to the bathroom during the second half of that race.
You
And I actually
finished the race?
I did. Yeah, I would have.
Wow.
I totally would have DNF'd now if it were.
Yeah,
if
I
that
was like, I would not
happened.
have done that. It sounds not worth
I was
it.
young enough at that point that I was going
Yeah.
to bang my head up against the wall if I had to. And
Yeah.
I actually looked
Ugh.
back at that one because I actually ran 12:08 for
Oh,
100
wow.
miles.
Jesus.
And I
That's fast.
I started running the numbers too. I was like looked at the 17 stops and how much time that took, plus like the lack of consistency that's probably going to cost you time from stopping and starting that much. And I was like, I actually think I probably would have broke the world record that day had I not had that issue.
Ugh, lame.
So that one stood out for that reason.
Oh, bummer. Oh man. Well, so it happens. It's, I remember like opening, this was ages ago. I had Mike Morty on my show a couple times. I just remember like reading about he won the San Francisco Marathon one time, but he had norovirus and he like ran it anyways and then won. I'm like, okay, cool. Good for you. He's
that
crazy.
sounds like what something Mike would have.
Yeah, I know. I was like, that's a very Mike Morty thing to do. How do you like your eggs cooked?
Scrambled.
What is your favorite beverage?
Oh, good question. Probably milk.
What are your comfort foods?
Comfort foods now? Probably popcorn this year. The second half of the year anyway.
Is that something you didn't used to eat?
I didn't not eat it, but I didn't eat it nearly as often.
Popcorn's pretty yummy. If it's that kind of salty, crunchy kind of thing you were
that's
going
true.
to have it after race next time.
I'm probably seeking comfort foods after hard efforts where I was pounding the carbohydrate too, so it probably makes sense.
Yeah. And normally my question is, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? But I don't think you eat ice cream, right? So or any dessert. It sounds like you don't eat dessert. I don't know.
I will eat some dessert from time to time. I don't necessarily plan for it, but like if I'm out at a restaurant or something and they serve dessert, I'll eat it. Ice cream, I'd probably go for something like Rocky Road or something like that. Something chocolate peanut buttery type. Yeah, that would be where I'd end up.
And last question, top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
Of gear, that's a great question. I would say now that I'm in Austin, a running belt of sorts, because the humidity is just so oppressive. If you want to carry anything, you don't want to have your chest covered up with a pack.
Yeah.
A pair of shoes has to be in this equation, right? For running. So something with a premium foam that feels really good. I've really liked Mizuno's Neo Zen foam this last year. So I would go with like some foam that has that kind of like light, snappy response in the shoes. For a third one, I like data. So a good Garmin. I got the Garmin 970 right now. So
nice.
That's 3, right? So
yes,
good.
Good answers. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Zach. This was a really fun conversation. Loved hearing about everything, your all your different experimentation with nutrition and reasoning behind it. And where can people find you online if they want to work with you or follow along your journey?
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me on. I have everything kind of centrally located at my website, which is zachbitter.com. There you can find the podcast, coaching, social media links, and all that stuff. I'm probably most active on Instagram, which is just at zachbitter.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Zach. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.
All right. That is our show for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are loving this show, please make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'd also be so grateful if you could share it on social media or with a friend and rate and review it wherever you get your shows, as it helps my podcast be found and continue to grow. If you'd like to support my free content, you can check out my affiliate codes on the shop page of eatforendurance.com and get some great discounts to some wonderful brands. And you can also buy my fueling themed stickers and my hat that is linked in the show notes. And finally, I always love hearing from you, whether it's feedback, topic requests, or just to say hi. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all next time.